Kia ora koutou. Nau mai hara mai ki tēnei kaupapa whakahirahira I pāna ki te kai hauora. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight, and Karen will do the formal welcome in a minute. But I just wanted to start us off with a karakia. Nō reira, tukua taku wairua, kia rere ki ngā taumata, hei arahi aku mahi, me taku whai I ngā taonga o nehe. Kia mau, kia ita, kia kore ai ngaro, kia pupuri, kia whakamaua, kia tina, haumie, huie, tai, kie. Tēnā koutou.
Thank you, Lily. Kia ora, good evening, everybody. My name is Karen Zinn, and I'm an associate professor here at AUT. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our event, Whole NZ, and our seminar titled Breaking Free from Type 2 Diabetes and Carbohydrate Addiction. Before I introduce the stars of the show, Dr. David and Jen Unwin, I just want to put a little bit of context around the seminar. So there's a group of us, academics at AUT and GPs or doctors in the community that have been working together for several years, around 10 years, and we've been working really hard to try and get some change to the health system. We've been advocating for a whole food approach with an emphasis on carbohydrate reduction, supported by a consistent behavior change coaching support system or strategy for people with pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. And we've been applying for research grants to the Health Research Council, to our government, for the last 6 years, and we've been unsuccessful. Apart from last year, when we obtained a grant from the HRC, or Health Research Council, to investigate this way of delivering healthcare in New Zealand. So we're very lucky, we've got endorsement from the government. We are in stage 2 of a 3-year implementation evaluation research project. So I want to just quickly introduce you to our team, which happen to be sitting, most of them, right in front of me over here. So if you guys can just maybe stand up and turn around. Yes, you. Yes, you. Okay, so Professor Grant Schofield, the most embarrassed over here. Most of you probably have heard of him or know him because he's been a key instigator of this work over the last several years. We've got Dr. Catherine Crofts, who is an AUT academic as well as a registered pharmacist. We've got Nigel Harris, who didn't want to come up the front, so I'll just embarrass him and get him to stand up. Professor Nigel Harris is our exercise specialist, so you can jump up and down and sit down again, Nige. And then we have our clinicians. Only some of them are here this evening. We've got Dr. Lily Fraser, who did our karakia, and Lily is the clinical lead for Turiki Healthcare in South Auckland, and she's recently moved down to Dunedin to shake up the territory down there, which she's doing really well. We've got Dr. Marcus Hawkins, who's based out at East Auckland at Botany Doctors, and I see some of his connections are here this evening, so nice to see you. And then we've got Dr. Glenn Davies, who again a lot of you will probably know, and Glenn is based down in Taupo, and he runs a clinic called Reversal NZ. So thanks, guys. You can sit down now. So why is this relevant to the Unwins? Well, the Unwins were gracious enough to come on board as our international advisors for this project. So we're very, very lucky to have them. As an introduction, Dr. David Unwin is pretty much the world's leading GP expert in this area of reversing type 2 diabetes using this approach. And he is renowned for his innovative approach and his cutting-edge approach to doing what he does. He's also been he's well published in very prestigious journals, and he's also had a huge influence on the UK health system. His partner in crime, Dr. Jen Unwin, is also internationally recognized or renowned as a behavioral psychologist. with a specific interest and focus on carbohydrate addiction. In 2021, she published a book called Fork in the Road, which I think you'll talk about later, and you can pick up on Amazon. And it's a book, there it is, happen to have one. Yeah, true story. And the book is about the emotional and physical dangers of overconsumption of sugar, flour, and ultra-processed foods. So David and Jen are absolute rock stars, and we are incredibly privileged to have them here. They are here this week in New Zealand to help us progress our work to the second stage, and we've decided to put on the seminar for you. And now that I've told them that the weather is always like this in New Zealand, they're quite keen to stay. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. David Unwin, who's going to start, and I will ask if we can keep our questions to the end. So please join me in welcoming David.
Hello. Have I got the clicker? Hello. Can you hear me? Yes? No? You can hear me? Great. Great. So type 2 diabetes, using the power of hope and a better diet to avoid drugs and disability. That's what this evening is about, to bring some hope to type 2 diabetes, which all around the world is becoming worse, worse, worse. In my own practice, we've suffered a 10-fold increase in the number of people with type 2 diabetes since I was a young man. A 10-fold increase. So our problem in the practice was not enough nurses, not enough doctors to deal with what is an epidemic. And so 12 years ago, we were unhappy really with how we were caring for our population with type 2 diabetes. And Jen and I started something new. And that's what we're going to tell you about this evening. What is it that we do in our NHS practice in Southport? We've got 9,500 patients and 9 doctors, so you've only got part of the team here. There's a much broader team, all of whom have improved their health. So we started this approach with our patients. It was a truly collaborative experience because we started it together. And fast forward, we now have a situation where in an NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, it's an NHS practice, we've got 20% of the entire diabetic register into drug-free remission. So that's amazing. We're really proud of it, and we're hoping that this could be replicated. There's no reason this can't. If we can do it in 10-minute appointments in the NHS, we think it can be done elsewhere, and that's why it's a message of hope. And I'm hoping that you will steal some of our ideas and do it here. So let's crack on. Health is wealth. I think health is the only wealth. I thought that was a very good place to begin. And it's interesting. I practiced medicine for the first 25 years in a conventional way, and I didn't really achieve a lot of health. I prescribed a great many drugs. I didn't see very many really healthy patients. And now I come to think about that health is wealth a lot. The other thing, everyone has something to offer. Each of us knows a piece of the puzzle. And I've already talked to you about this being a collaborative approach. And so that medicine is something that should be done with patients, not to them. And in fact, if you work with patients, it's magic and you get better results. And I've learned a lot of that from Jen, and she'll be sharing more of that in the second half. So that was me, 1986 till 2012. I saw type 2 diabetes as a chronic, progressive, deteriorating condition that nearly always needs drugs in increasing amounts. That's a very depressing statement that I do not agree with. What we're dealing with is the transition to Dr. David Unwin 2012 to 24. I now see type 2 diabetes, a condition that usually does not need drugs, and it can be reversed or put into remission. A complete change. And if I have time, a single patient, one patient taught me that lesson in 2012. Very ferocious woman that I owe a great deal to. So I hope we can come back to the ferocious lady who taught me a lesson. The question is, what are we doing differently, and could you do it here? I always like to base things on patient stories. This is Roy, and he's achieved 6 years now of drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. I'll be defining remission in a minute. We're looking there at the hemoglobin A1C. That's the average sugariness of Roy's blood. And you can see he was at 51, and suddenly he dropped it down to 39. But if you look along, you'll see that something happened and it went up again. This is a key point, that people in their normal lives, they don't stay the same. And whatever you decide to do in New Zealand, it's very important that you factor in maintenance and that we care for people. It's not just about doing well at the beginning. You have to maintain it. And if you don't design a service that looks after people in an ongoing way, drift occurs and they deteriorate. And you see that Roy drifted off, and then we had to bring him back. And now he's good again. He's good again. That's just the human condition and the world we live in, where there's a great deal of carb creep. And it needed a quick phone call just to ask him where that sugar had come from. And it was biscuits. And he said, you know, okay, give me a chance. We'll do a blood test in, say, 6 weeks. And you'll see Roy's delivered and sustained it. There's a very important message about maintenance. Just to show you Roy now, so he's lost about a quarter of his body weight. He's completely changed. I think the main thing is Roy isn't really a patient anymore. He knows stuff and he's self-caring. He can look after himself. Yes, he occasionally needs me, but he's not on any medication. I don't see him as a patient. He's somebody who knows how to care for himself. And that's wonderful, cheerful work. He doesn't need me. He's not dependent on me. So type 2 diabetes remission is some of what we're talking about this evening. So it's defined as a previous diagnosis of type 2 diabetes and a hemoglobin A1C, the average sugariness of his blood, less than 48 millimoles per mole. Of course, without anti-diabetic medication. And it's got to be maintained or it's pointless. We've got 20% of our entire diabetic register into remission. Another patient. Chris, I've looked after Chris for 38 years. 38 years. And that's how I first knew him. Very heavy, he weighed about 19 stone. He was on medication for diabetes, high blood pressure. He was a sick man, he had fatty liver. Look at him now. Look at him now. Again, he's not a patient. He's a fit guy. He's years older, but feels younger. Long-term remission, we wrote him up in the British Medical Journal in 2015, and he's still doing well. And the point is, we have 137 cases like this. And can you imagine what cheerful medicine that is? Seeing people like that does your heart good. Marvelous medicine, wonderful, and it gets you up in the morning. I was going to retire when I was 55 because I hated general practice. It was miserable. I never saw anybody grateful or well, and it was all the patient's fault because they didn't do as I told them. It's all their fault. They didn't lose weight. What I missed was the common denominator was me, all that rubbish advice. So I blamed the patients for not taking my advice, but actually the problem was me. You see? And now I'm giving different advice, and 137 patients have put their diabetes into remission in a single practice. And I know that GPs, and some of them are in the room, have replicated this and done the same. Possible in New Zealand, it's possible all over the world. Very cheerful medicine. A lot of what you're going to learn this evening has been published. This is the paper published in BMJ Nutrition. It's open access. So if anybody wants the real detail of this, all you've got to do is Google BMJ Nutrition and Unwin, and that paper is open access. The diet sheets, everything are there. There's more in the supplementary file. So what makes a difference? Part of it is psychology. Big part, understanding behavior change and psychology, and that's what Jen brings to the picnic. I think hope is a really important part of that, and that's what we're trying to do, is bring hope to the world of diabetes. Many of my patients are in better health now. You saw those two guys, they're in better health now than they were years ago with their diabetes. So that's got to be hope. You don't necessarily have to come to harm. You don't necessarily need drugs. So hope is so important. I think helping patients understand physiology is time very well spent. Because if we're going to replicate this all over the world, it helps if patients can individualize the approach to their own lives. And if you understand what you're doing, you don't have to memorize a diet sheet. Because everybody's diet's different, your budget might be different, your preferences, your religion might make a difference. But if you understand why you are doing what you do, that's part of empowerment. So we're going to go into that as well. So we're starting with psychology. Another patient, this is Marcia. At this point, she weighs 97 kilos. She's been on insulin since 2004, 90 units a day. That's a lot of insulin. Marcia saw her diabetes as chronic and deteriorating. She's hanging onto the wall because she can't walk well. She has chronic pain. Marcia has a lot of problems. But look at Marcia now. Another one of our happy cases. No insulin for years. Blood pressure, normal. A message of hope. Where did that come from? It was to do with her goal. How are we motivated? We're motivated by our goals, our hopes. Marcy was really interested. Could she ever come off insulin after all that time? So I said, perhaps. Are you interested? Shall we work together? Now, Marcia had been terribly underestimated by healthcare professionals because she's from Brazil and her first language is not English. So she's far more intelligent than the doctors and nurses who worked with her had known. Her capacity for change was massive once she understood what she was trying to do. Another point of the psychology is if we just look at Marcia's graph, so this is where she's done well, and then if you look, it climbed again. Well, it climbed again because she had a very serious accident, was incredibly ill, needed ongoing support. That's what we do in primary care. Look at the second. Look, it climbed again there. And that was because Marcia also has a carbohydrate addiction problem. And when she was under stress, that reared its ugly head. We had to deal with that as well. But then she's back down to 46 now, off her insulin, and doing fine. So I don't want you to think it's too simple, because it isn't. It needs ongoing care. But she's been off her insulin. She never went back on insulin. It was not necessary. This is a person whose diabetes is going up and down over the years. Look how it's spiking up and down. That person's weight was also leaping up and down like that. For many years, I would have said, look how that person did really well down there, coming down to 41, and then went all the way up to 120, which for a hemoglobin A1C is sky high. Most clinicians would panic at that point and start drugs. But her problem was, we called it carb creep. That's trivializing something that's far more serious. It's not carb creep, that is carb addiction. When intelligent people do things they know harms their health. An intelligent person does something they know harms their health. Isn't that like smoking? Isn't that like drinking? People who drink and smoke are intelligent, and they know it's going to harm their health. And this is what Jen will be teaching you about later, because that is the problem that that patient has, and that is why they have diabetes in the first place, because they can't resist carbohydrates. Feedback. Feedback is absolutely key to behavior change. You've got to know how you're doing. And I think, again, in any clinical service that you design, you've got to think, how will your clients know how they're doing? So I do graphs. In the UK, our computer systems do wonderful graphs. And I expect you're nodding, you can do it here. Graphs. People are so proud of their graphs. They take them home. They're on fridges all over the place. But feedback can occur in other ways. This young man is holding his belt where it used to be. And he likes that. That's pride for him. He's had to cut loads of new holes in his belt. And it's good feedback. And he knows if he has to start moving his belt out, if his belly's getting big, he knows to do something. So feedback needs thinking about. It can come in different forms. And what suits the person in front of you? What sort of feedback would be right for them? This is a 59-year-old guy with type 2 diabetes. And he was started on insulin in hospital on August the 22nd last year. And he was told that the insulin would be for life. His wife was a nurse. And she said, when they were giving him cornflakes in the morning with orange juice, said, wouldn't it be better to give him less carbohydrate? And they said, no, we'll just match it with insulin. I'm glad you're laughing, because that is a terrible irony. You know, you just match it with insulin. And she was a nurse and concerned, and he's only 59. And she was worried about her husband, and they wouldn't do anything about his diet, despite her asking. So, of course, when he comes to me, I prescribe the Freestyle Libre that many of you will know, that gives continuous reading on what the blood sugar is. And you'll see he was on insulin, but look at the control. Here's the normal range, look, in the white. So his diabetes, even on insulin, his hemoglobin A1C was about 100. So insulin wasn't working well. So you see there, from the 26th of September to the 6th of October, as I say, that's a percentage, but you'd have that as about 100 millimoles per mole. So on the, I think it was the 9th of October, so there's the 6th of October, there's the 9th. Look how his blood sugar is continually in range. He cut the carbs, stopped eating things that put up his blood sugar, and you can see there it improves. and improves and improves. And during that time, I'm cutting the insulin. So we were cutting refined carbohydrates in his diet, and we're cutting the insulin. By November the 20th, he's off insulin altogether, having been told he would be on it for the rest of his life. And look at the tracings now, in range the whole time. Message of hope, in this case, established with feedback. He needed that feedback. He's learned so much from the Freestyle Libre about what he can eat and what he can't eat. And it really helps individualize his care. It also keeps him on track because he's still wearing them now, even though he's not using insulin. That's feedback. Physiology. Explaining dietary principles of the low-carb approach in a way people can both understand and remember. I think I'd talk about that. Why eat things that put up your blood sugar if you have type 2 diabetes? Why not eat nutrient-dense, healthy foods that don't put up your blood sugar? That's my message. A really simple message. So from that, the question is, well, where does sugar come from and what does it do to me? So a few principles. I explain to patients that the hemoglobin A1C is a measure of how sugary your blood has been over the past 3 months. I'm talking about sugar from the very first moment you come into my room. I'm interpreting your blood results in a sugary context. So we're mentioning sugar from the beginning because that's where I think it's helpful for my patients to focus their attention. Sugary blood damages the lining of blood vessels rapidly. There's a reference there. The non-stick lining of your arteries, the glycocalyx, is damaged within 6 hours of a high blood sugar. That's why it isn't just the average blood sugar, the hemoglobin A1C, that matters. It's also time in range. And time in range via the Freestyle Libre and continuous glucose monitoring, that's the next thing, because time in range is really linked to outcomes for our patients. Time in hospital and for complications. Time in range, very interesting. Insulin. I explain to patients that insulin is there to protect you from high blood sugars. Insulin pushes the sugar out of your blood inside cells where it can do less damage. The question is, what happens to all that sugar that went out of your bloodstream? It ends up in your belly and it ends up in your liver. And it's useful for patients to think about, where does the sugar go? So there's insulin pushing glucose out of the bloodstream and into certainly muscle cells for energy. But so many people don't run around enough to use up all the sugar out of cornflakes and bread. So where does the excess sugar go? Well, it ends up in fat cells, central obesity, and it ends up in the liver. Liver, a lot of it becomes triglyceride. And just so that patients understand, well, why does fatty liver matter? We know now that 38% of the whole of the developed world has fatty liver. 38% of your friends, your relatives, people you care for have fatty liver right now. Why does that matter? Well, here is somebody. Now, if we just watch, the liver's filling with fat, that person's eating bread and rice and potatoes, crisps, chocolate bars, sweets. Fatty liver interferes with the good work of insulin. So your insulin doesn't work as well, and it's not protecting you as well as it did. This is half the story of type 2 diabetes from Roy Taylor at Newcastle University. The other half is that, of course, insulin is produced by your pancreas gland, but that's filling with fat as well. And so, unfortunately, you're struggling to produce enough insulin. But you need more insulin because your insulin sensitivity has gone down. It's a double whammy. Double whammy. And these two things together take about 10 years to give you diabetes. Roy Taylor talks about the long silent scream from the liver. For years, I ignored abnormal liver function tests, saying it was just a bit of fat in the liver. An example of how wrong I was. It's really important not to ignore fatty liver because it's leading to harm. And I ignored it for 25 years. But this talk is all about hope. And this is the nature of remission of type 2 diabetes, because if you reduce circulating insulin, reduce liver fat, you're improving insulin sensitivity. Reduce pancreatic fat, you're increasing insulin secretion. And that is how you can reverse type 2 diabetes. There are different ways to do it. Bariatric surgery works very fast. You can starve people if you put them on the 800-calorie diet. That works as well. I just happen to think that low carb is a friendlier option for my patients. It works. I should say I prefer the word remission to reversing. I think remission reminds you that if you eat as you ate before, it will come back. I have type 2 diabetes. I'm not actually cured by being low carb. In remission. And if I eat stupidly, it will come back. So that's why I do prefer the word remission, although other clinicians like reversing. But I think that's claiming too much. Insulin, fuel usage. Yes, why are people who are very heavy hungry? Because they are. They're genuine. They say they're hungry, and they are. Insulin does many, many things. One of the things it does is prevent you from being able to burn your own fat. So if you're snacking through the day, having biscuits, bits of bread, you can't burn your own fat. When you go low carb, the insulin drops and you can burn your own fat. You become a fat burner. And one of the things that patients tell me in every clinic I do, and some of you in the audience will know this is true, you're less hungry when you cut the carbs. Just much less, people are nodding. You're just much less hungry. And you think, do I have to eat breakfast because I'm not hungry? No, you don't have to eat. And it really helps with the weight loss because you burn your own fat. We are a dual fuel engine. We can burn carbohydrate, but we can also burn fat. You can't burn fat if you eat too much carbohydrate. And that's one of the really important ways in which cutting carbohydrates helps, because then you can become a fat burner. Perhaps a bit contentious that if you have type 2 diabetes, glucose becomes a sort of metabolic poison. I think actually that's about right. So I would say to people, well, how poisoned do you want to be? Personally, I don't want to be at all poisoned. You know, moderation, well, then you could be moderately poisoned. What are you going to pick? And actually, if you're talking to patients, they don't want to be ill. They really don't want to be ill. And when they understand this, they work with you. All those patients, they're not different. People always say, oh, David, I think your patients are different from mine. They are not. It's me who has changed. Working with, I agree, intelligent people, but people are intelligent all over the world. When they understand, they are prepared to change. If you're hearing people say, I couldn't possibly live without bread, you perhaps missed out some of the motivational stages that people would understand how they could improve without bread, and then they'll give up bread. So, where does sugar come from? So many people with type 2 diabetes, they understand about sugar. They're not foolish. And they don't understand why the hemoglobin A1C is high. They say, I gave up sugar years ago. And we come back. Do you remember the woman, the frightening woman that I learned so much from? Well, I knew she wasn't taking her diabetes medication. I wrote to her asking her to come and see me so I could tell her off about the risks of not taking metformin because we were losing money in the practice because she wasn't taking her metformin. When she came in, she was hopping mad. Hopping mad. She said, "You're going to tell me off because I haven't taken your stupid metformin. Well, when you do my blood test, you will find that my blood sugar is normal, and it's no thanks to you." She said, "You've given me metformin, which has given me diarrhea for 9 years. And you never once, not once, did you tell me that bread was sugar or that cornflakes were sugar." She said, "I am wondering if you're medically qualified." Which was a very fair point. I was scared. I was scared because she was making a very good point. I hadn't ever told her that bread was sugar, and I had given her metformin without any thought. So I said, "Okay, I've clearly got lots to learn." And it turned out she was online with 42,000 other people, all teaching each other how to cut the carbs, all of them saying, "Your doctor is going to ridicule you for this." So she was armed because she was expecting me to ridicule what she did. That was terrible. So I owe a great deal to that lady and also to Jen, to two women really, because she scared me into listening properly back in 2012. Anyway, back to starch, and back now to what every one of you should have in front of you. So I was trying to find a way to help people understand the sugary consequences of their dietary choices. So we worked out the glycemic load of food into something my patients do understand, teaspoons of sugar. So if you look here, you can see that a small bowl of boiled basmati rice, 150 grams, is the same as 10 teaspoons of sugar. So it becomes immediately obvious that rice is a poor choice if you have type 2 diabetes, as are potatoes, chips, spaghetti, even the humble banana, depending on how ripe it is, can be up to 6 teaspoons of sugar. These infograms are now in 31 languages. There are 7 of them. You've only got 1 of them here, but there are 7. If you want them, they are free of copyright. All you have to do is Google Unwin and PHC. The sugar infograms there are 7 of them, and they're in 31 languages. Gone crazy all over the world. And you'll see next, the next slide, the reason I've given you all one of those is due to a technical hitch that's appeared in Polish. So we don't need to go into the Polish version, but it proves that it's in different languages. That's the diet sheet that we use. Point being, we tried to get it all onto one A4 sheet. My patients don't like booklets with pages and pages. So there is that diet sheet, and that's also available if you go Unwin PHC. It's a charity Jen and I helped set up. The diet sheet is there. It's also published in BMJ Nutrition. A couple of things. Why not turn the white stuff green? So, you know, if you're going to have steak and chips, instead of the chips, why don't you have a big salad, or why don't you have a lot of broccoli? If you're going to have a curry, you could serve it on a lot of green beans instead of that rice. Oh, there you are. Google PHC Unwin sugar. So really, I'm coming back to why not eat nutrient-dense food that doesn't put your blood sugar up? So this is somebody with type 2 diabetes, happens to be me, and I've got a Freestyle Libre on, and that's what I ate, and absolutely nothing happened to my blood sugar, nothing. Result. In the early days, I faced a great deal of criticism and difficulty because my colleagues in the practice were worried because they thought, well, if people cut carbohydrate, what if they increase the fats, and what will happen to their cholesterol? So from the very beginning, we kept data on what happened to our patients in terms of blood pressure, cholesterol, and everything we could possibly measure. And that now is a very precious resource for audit and publication because I know what has happened to my patients because every one of them is followed up. And that's a complicated slide, and Jen tells me I've only got 5 minutes. Very strict. So we've improved everything but age, basically. We can't do anything about your age, but weight, hemoglobin A1C, serum cholesterol, HDL cholesterol went up, cholesterol ratio improved, LDL cholesterol, triglyceride went down a lot, and blood pressure. Astonishingly, there isn't one drug, one tablet could do that for your patients. Even if you took 4 tablets, it probably wouldn't do all of that. So the results we got were astonishing at the beginning, and so much so that I thought I was probably a fraud because I thought it can't be true. So Professor Roy Taylor, who wrote with me later, I sent him all the data to check, is it okay? And he did the stats, and that's how we ended up publishing together. Quickly, what happens? So of the people who the people who try low carb at Norwood Avenue, 51% achieve remission. What happens to the others? Another 46% get improved diabetic control. Only 3% end up with the worst diabetic control at the end of 33 months. Really worthwhile work. Quick word about prevention. So we've been looking at what happens to our patients. Is the answer to diabetes that we drug the entire population? Is that really the answer? That we're going to inject or drug all our young people so they don't become diabetic? No, we should be thinking about prevention. So look at that. For people with pre-diabetes, 93% at Norwood Avenue will achieve a normal blood sugar if I get to you. If you wait until you're diabetic in the first year, 77% will achieve remission. If you wait for 5 years, I can only get 51% of you into remission. So we should start earlier. We shouldn't wait because it becomes harder to reverse the damage. Does it last? Yes, that's somebody who's got 9 years remission. So yes, it can. There's Roy, and his has lasted, but not all the time. It's required some extra work. Come on. One of the things I would say is working with patients. We didn't have the money. We were so short of money, we had to do group consultations, dealing with people in 20 at a time. But we've discovered that group consultations develops a kind of magic within the practice because you get the most wonderful patient experts. Do you remember me saying about every person has part of the puzzle? Each of you knows stuff. Each of you has wisdom about your own life. Well, that comes out if you do group consultations because the people help each other. It's absolutely magic. I was scared at the beginning because I didn't know how to do it, but it's actually really fun, and you get wonderful patient. Social media. How are we to spread this around the world? So you can see that's my teaspoon of sugar equivalents, 1 million impressions around the world on Twitter. Dr. Tro is doing something very similar in America. In fact, I know of doctors in every continent in the world doing this. Hundreds are doing it in the UK. I've got a personal Google group with 500 doctors on it. 3,000 GPs have done my e-learning module for the Royal College. So it's spreading. Social media matters. Oh, this is me just showing off because we got a very high altmetric score on that paper. That's the most popular paper that BMJ Nutrition has ever published. And that is because of the international interest in what we do. It's massive. You're already doing it. Here we are, a paper from New Zealand, from your own experts that you have. You already have the knowledge. You've got people doing wonderful work already, and it's been published. This is interesting, it's from the American Diabetes Association. Reducing overall carbohydrate intake for individuals with diabetes has demonstrated the most evidence for improving glycemia. Not some evidence or a bit of evidence, but the most evidence. This is an evidence-based intervention. I think we're nearly at the end now. So think about diabetic control a bit like the water in a barrel. You're running water in, so you're running sugar in from rice, potatoes, cereals, and table sugar, and there's glucose coming out to do with exercise or maybe drugs. But doesn't it make sense to turn the tap off, really, rather than just keep bailing using a bucket to bail it? Why not turn the tap off? That was a patient of mine's idea. It's not mine. This is just to show you how rapidly this can be done. There's Dave, and it was on his 60th birthday, and around then he came to see me, and his hemoglobin A1C was 108. That's really high. So he had a very miserable birthday. But 16 weeks later, we'd got his diabetes into remission. In 16 weeks. As I say, what cheerful, wonderful medicine. I just love it, and you will too. So, for most patients, the cause of type 2 diabetes is actually dietary. It can be stress, and it can be lack of exercise, but mainly we ate our way into this epidemic of type 2 diabetes. We ate our way in, but we can eat our way out again with nutrient-dense, tasty food. It's mainly sugar and the starchy carbs that digest down into sugar that put blood sugar up. Type 2 drug-free remission can be achieved in 50% of those advised on a low-carb diet. And then we have the idea of hope and Marcia. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Have you got... What's happening now?
Good evening, everybody. We're so happy to be here, and yeah, we're just thrilled to have been invited and be able to talk to you. So I'm going to be talking about psychology of lifestyle change. You've heard a little bit about it, but let's expand a bit more. And David's sitting there because he loves to interrupt. He's got a microphone, and he'll be. Obviously, I don't work in his clinic. I've just talked with him and sort of coached him really in how to change the way that he consults with people to get the best results in terms of getting started, keeping going. And also, more recently, I've been so interested in this topic of food addiction and how we can help people who really struggle to implement this approach, even when they know it's the right thing to do, and they feel so much better when they do it. And you've seen some of the graphs of some of David's patients who have that struggle. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as well. So this is it really. Sustained behavior change, it's simple in theory, but it's very difficult in practice, and certainly for many people. Waiting for motivation to come along doesn't really seem to work. And also the other thing that doesn't work is just giving people advice, which is a very traditional thing that we do in healthcare. You know, here's my advice of what you need to do. Here's a diet sheet. If advice was a good strategy, nobody would smoke. We'd all be our best weight. We'd all be healthy because we know really what we're supposed to do. It's not a lack of information that we have. So what does work? And David's already told you it's about hope, but I'm going to explain that in a bit more detail and how it is that we can enhance hope in ourselves, but also in our patients for better outcomes. And also, we're hardwired for greed. It's in our animal nature, it's in our evolution to survive. So we find food rewarding, and that's been exploited by the food industry. And they've made food hyper rewarding in a way that affects our brains. So we're going to learn about that and how you can beat it. So hope, you've already heard this word mentioned, but why is that of interest, and what difference does it make, and how can we enhance it in ourselves and in others? So there's lots and lots of research on this concept of hope. It's a concept from positive psychology. It's something that I got incredibly interested in when I worked in a large hospital setting, and I saw people who maybe had a similar condition, diabetes, or cancer, or I actually did my doctorate in lower limb amputation. So basically, in lower limb amputation, everybody's had the same operation, they've lost part of their leg. But what I found was that some people cope with that incredibly well, and they just didn't have good quality of life, and some people really struggled, and they had very poor quality of life, but very poor mental health in response to that. And what was it that kind of made the difference? So I did my doctorate in the role of hope in lower limb amputation and how much it predicted who did well and who didn't do so well. And it was an incredibly good predictor. But here's a slightly more recent study. And I just show it you because it's an excellent study. It had 13,000 people in it with a mean age of 66 and a good long follow-up, a 4-year follow-up. And what they found when they looked at this idea of people with higher hope, what did that predict? So it's a prospective study looking forwards. And higher hope prospectively predicts better physical health overall. People are more likely to look after themselves if they're hopeful individuals. Reduced all-cause mortality. People literally live longer if they're more hopeful. There's been some other fantastic studies on that. One was a study of it's called the Nun study, if you want to look it up. And it followed nuns who went into a convent, and they analysed, they had to write a piece before they went into the convent, and they analysed the things that the nuns had written. And the ones who were more hopeful at the beginning lived much longer when they followed them up. Fewer chronic conditions, lower cancer risk, better psychological and social well-being, and all of that even when controlling for the traditional things that affect those things, such as longevity and so on. So hope seems to be linked to this sense of purpose, good relationships, good mental and physical health, and it sort of becomes a virtuous cycle. So there's that paper there if anybody wants to look it up and learn a little bit more about hope. But what do we mean by hope when we're talking about these kinds of studies and what David and I are talking about? It's not just sort of what you might call sort of just optimism that things are going to turn out all right, which is one way of thinking about hope, isn't it? It's a little bit different to that. So this is an American guy who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but really wrote a lot and did a lot of research about hope in health settings. And he said hope is defined as the perceived capability, so how much do I think myself, to derive pathways to desired goals. So do I think I can see the way to a preferred future? And motivate oneself by agency thinking to use those pathways. So can I see the steps to a better future, and am I motivated to take those steps? You need both those things, because obviously a lot of us know the steps to take to get fitter, lose weight, stop smoking, but are we actually motivated to take those steps, and do we believe we have the capability to do it is the key thing.
Just asking if I can interrupt. She says I can. I'd just like to contrast that with the standard medical teaching. On the whole, as a doctor for 25 years, I didn't use hope, I used fear. The high cholesterol, the high blood pressure. What's going to happen to you if you don't take my tablets? I used fear. Hope is fundamentally so different, but it leads to a much more cheerful style of medicine. I use fear, and it's miserable. Jen has taught me to use hope. It's completely different.
Very
End
good.
of interruption.
Very good interruption.
Thank you.
So Snyder called that, he sort of to put that in simpler language, he called it the will and the ways to a better future. And again, if you want to, it looks like an old paper, but because it's a theoretical paper, and it's wonderful as well. So if you want to look up any more about this idea of how you define hope, then I recommend that paper to you. So what I did was took the ideas, Snyder's ideas about what hope is, and the concepts that you might sort of put into it. And I don't know if any of you have heard of solution-focused brief therapy. Is that something that's hit New Zealand? Yes. I trained as a solution-focused therapist, and it's a therapy that works really well in health settings. So I combined those Snyder's ideas with how you have a conversation with someone in a solution-focused way, and as David said, in a more sort of positive, hopeful way, and made up this sort of 4-stage interview process that we sort of collaborated on, and I taught David how to do, and we've also trained other healthcare staff to do. And it's supposed to be super easy to remember and super simple to do in brief brief appointments. And GRIN is the acronym, G-R-I-N, GRIN. And we've written it up, and this is the link to, I think all these papers that I'm linking are open access, so you'll be able to, certainly this one is. Okay, so this is how it goes, and I'm just going to describe it, and then I'm going to go through each in a bit more detail, and David's going to do a lot of interrupting. Okay, so G is for goals or best hopes. Can the coach and the doctor and the client patient agree on what the person's best hopes are, what their goals are? And we're going to, as I say, we'll talk more about that. So you might ask someone something like, you know, what are your best hopes for coming to see me today? Or, you know, if you were able to put your diabetes into remission, what difference would that make to you? Trying to get a sense of what somebody's preferred future is. So that's G, and then, wrong button. And then R is resources, like what's already working, what's already going well. You're just trying to explore. People don't come to you as a blank slate. They've usually had some success, or, you know, they've lost weight in the past, or, you know, there's something about them that's going to help them on this journey. So we'll talk more about it, but R stands for what resources they have, sort of psychologically, practically, previous experience, and how resilient they are. And then I stands for increments. So once you've got a sense of where they're trying to get to, what's already on their side, what's already working, what's the next tiny step or the next little change that they feel they can make. And that always comes from the person. And if you're asking them and they give you a suggestion, it's more than likely that they feel they can do it. So it's not you saying, I think your next step should be, which would be advice, which we've already agreed not so good. It's you know, what the person feels is they're able to take as a next step. And then N is for noticing, and that's usually at review, at a next appointment, you'd be asking them to reflect on what's working. Did that work? What did they notice? You know, if they've had some success, like David says, maybe, you know, the belts, the clothes are looser, or they're feeling fitter, or they're breathing better, then we're talking about that, and we're complimenting them on any success that they've had. And you can basically kind of keep going around this process. It's also a process that, I mean, we use a lot in family life, not in such a formal way, but also you can use on yourself. You know, say you were had a big project at work, you could start thinking through what your best hopes were for that project, what's already in place that's working that you don't need to change, what would be the next small step you're going to take. At the end of the week, what are you noticing that's different? So it's a nice process that you can actually use in meetings and work and home life, but also in these health settings. Okay, so goals then, and setting trying to get a sense of where the person wants to get to, because then we're working together towards something that somebody already wants. You're not trying to get them to do something that they don't want. You're traveling in the same direction. And, research really shows that when you ask people about their best hopes and their goals, when you're working with them, you just get such more positive engagement, rapport. They're much more likely to sort of work with you in a positive way. So some example questions, and these are all in the paper that we wrote up, so you can get them from there. So what are your best hopes for your health, diabetes, weight loss? What will success look like for you? Or, you've come to see me today. If working together is a fantastic success, what will be going on in 6 months' time? What will be different? What would be better for you? And getting a lot of detail around that, the more that somebody can picture this future that they're describing in detail, the better outcomes you're going to get, the better motivation you're going to get. So we never accept, or David would never accept, I want to lose 10 kilos, because that's not the sort of, what will be different in their life if they lose 10 kilos? What would other people notice about them? What difference is that going to make in their lives? Rather than just this kind of rather, it's like a sort of there's no emotional hook to that sort of weight loss idea, but how's their life going to be different? So getting a lot of detail around it. What difference would it make to you if you reversed your diabetes? What would that look like? Or what difference would it make to you if you lost those 10 kilos? Continue until they have a real sense of it, and you have a real sense of this preferred future. You can kind of picture it.
Yeah, I was just going to illustrate this with a case, a consented case. And this isn't about diabetes, just to show you how you could take it into another sphere. So a mother brings her teenage son to see me. And she says, well, I can't do anything with him. You're going to have to do something. I give up. And this kid, he's not going to speak. Not going to speak. He's angry. They're both angry. So she said he's a failure. He won't come out of his bedroom. He won't do exams. What will happen to him? I've no idea. You do something. So, of course, we send her out of the room. And I try and find out what is it this kid wants? If there's been a miracle and he could do what he likes, what would he like? And he said to me, he said, I know I ought to leave the house because I want a job. I said, what else do you want? He says, I want a girlfriend. So he was a really nice kid, and he wanted a job and he wanted a girlfriend. Those were his goals. And what sort of job would you like? He'd like a job to care for other people, because he said, I understand what it's like to be rubbish in your head. Such a lovely kid. Such a lovely kid. So we'll take this kid through the various stages. But there we have a clear goal: wanting a girlfriend, wanting a job that helped other people.
Yeah.
But I hope you can see that consultation was twisted instantly into an area of hope about what he wanted, not what was wrong with him. And that's so key. So key. Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing to notice is at this point it's about ends and not means. And I think sometimes for healthcare professionals it's really difficult to start at this kind of end point, because I always get the question, well, what about people who want something that's impossible? So we'll perhaps come to that if we come to questions. I've got some answers for that. So it's about ends, not means. Okay, so then R, the R in GRIN, is for resources and resilience. So what's already working, what's already helping. So quite a simple way to do this is kind of, when they've described this kind of miracle preferred future that they really want, you can say, well, if that was 10 out of 10, is that what we're aiming for? Would that be a 10 out of 10 if we get there? And they say, yes, that would be 10 out of 10. Then you could say, well, if 0 out of 10 is where absolutely none of that is happening, where are you now out of 10? And the interesting thing is that most people say 3. Not always. Sometimes you get 0, sometimes you get 7, but a lot of people say 3. But of course, that allows you to then ask, oh, 3, that's interesting. What makes it 3? What's already going on that makes it 3? And they might say, well, you know, I have joined a gym, or they might say, I do take my own lunch to work. I don't eat the rubbish that's in the canteen anymore, whereas I used to do that. So you're getting a sense of what's already working, or what's already in place, or do they go to the gym every night? Do they walk the dog? Have they got a spouse at home who's trying to eat healthily, and they're trying to they're joining in, or whatever it is. So what makes it that and not less? So you're looking at what's already there. Have they had any success in the past? Now, nearly everybody has tried to lose weight in the past who's overweight or got diabetes. So they might say, oh yeah, I did Slimming World and I lost 3 stone. Oh, right, interesting. How did you do that? What worked for you at that point? What went well there? How did you do that? Who's helping and supporting you right now? Trying to get an idea of who's in the house, maybe who does the cooking, who's around, who might be working with them. And what characteristics have they got? What personal skills and strengths? So again, in general practice, you often know your patients reasonably well. So David's often able to say, well, I know you're a tough cookie because I saw you look after your mum, when she had cancer or whatever it was. I know you're strong in that way. So what personal characteristics have they got? And what would your best friend say about your ability to achieve this goal? It is a nice way to ask it, because people often don't like to talk about their own strengths, but if you take a third-person perspective, they might be able to.
So getting back to our young man, I was asking, were there any circumstances where life was a bit easier? Was there anything he did that helped a bit? And he said 2 things. He said, I grow my hair really long because I don't like people to see my eyes. So if I bring my hair forward, that helps. And he said, if I add dark glasses to that and a hat, he said that helps. So he had already worked out that some things helped him get out of that bedroom. And I'd never have known that if we'd gone along the problem thing from the beginning.
Okay. So the I in GRIN is for increments, little increments, small signs of progress. And obviously research shows, we all know that setting small goals, you're much more likely to be successful than this. Obviously with the best hopes, it's like a big goal, but you have to break it down into these small steps, the ways that Snyder talks about. So questions like, what would be the first small sign that you're making progress? What might be the first tiny sign? What else is a question that we use a lot, because it just gets more detail all the time. So who might be the first person to notice that you're doing something different, and what would they be noticing? Another way to look at it is you've perhaps set up this scale of from 0 to 10 where the person's already at 3. So another thing you can ask is, if you were at 4, what would you be doing differently? And I really like that question, and you nearly always get something really good and something that you may never guess. So we're probably going to hear what this young man said about what plus 1 would be for them. What would they notice if they were making that bit of progress? What else would tell you we're making progress? Or what's the smallest possible step you could take today? What's one thing you could change today that's going to make a difference? And David often asks, what's one small thing that we can agree today that we can talk about next time we meet?
So the young man, I said, so if you use your hat and you bring your hair forward, what might you do? And he said, well, thinking about it, maybe I could go around the block. Maybe I could leave the house and go around the block, not talk to anybody, come back in, and I'd be dead proud if I could do that. So that was what he agreed with me, that we'd see each other again. He was going to see if he could go out of the house by himself and just go around the block and come back.
So the N in grin is for noticing. This is the last stage. What have you already noticed in this conversation that makes you hopeful that you'll achieve your best hopes? Is something that you could ask right there and then. What will you notice when you wake up tomorrow that shows you making progress? When somebody sees you tomorrow, you know, what will they notice about you that's different? You could ask those sort of straight away, but usually we use noticing, as you're going to see, in a follow-up appointment. If you're really bold, and I did start doing this, what's better since we last spoke? Now, how many healthcare professionals would start with a question like that? You just wouldn't, would you? You always say, how have things been, in a kind of expecting to hear some terrible, you know, how have you been since we last spoke? What's been better since we last spoke? Even if people start with something negative, and they usually do, because as healthcare professionals, we've trained them to bring us negative stuff. But if you say, what's been better since we last spoke, they'll perhaps say something negative. Nearly always people will find something. You know, they might say, it's been a really difficult week, but do you know what? I think I have coped with it a bit better than I would have done previously, or something like that. Or, you know, they've just noticed that going up and down stairs is a little bit easier, or something like that. So, and if they've done the thing or some change has happened, how did you do that? You know, kind of really getting people to examine, and this idea of agency again. Like, how did you do that? How did you get that done? And also another really good follow-up is if you've written in your notes that last time they were a 3, you can ask them where they are now on the scale. And nearly always people will say, you know, 3.5, 4, something like that. And again, it's just giving people this. Do you remember that hope was about people believing that they can make the changes, and that becomes a virtual cycle? So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to sort of shine the spotlight on any small success, and then get them to attribute it to what they've done, so that it becomes this confidence and this self-esteem that's increasing. So where are you now? What makes it? So if they say 3.5, 4, why are you saying that? What's better? And then how did you do that?
I just like a personal plea. Please be curious about success. You'll learn so much. The number of people who say, I've got these wonderful results and my doctor isn't a bit interested. That's awful, because people do great things and they want you to notice. And if somebody does something, you learn a lot by saying, how did you do that? That's amazing. It's a positive comment. Be endlessly curious about success, and you'll learn so much about your patients. Getting back to our friend, the young man, so you remember he thought he'd have a crack at going around the block. He came in and he slammed down on my desk a happy mug. And he said, I didn't just go around the block, I went into a paper shop and I bought you this. Honestly, and his mother was crying, and I was like, oh God. Because very often it's, if people contract to do a thing with you, they nearly always do it. Would you agree, Jen? They nearly always do it. And in fact, they very often do more. And that boy was absolutely typical. He knew I believed in him, and he wanted to show me. And so he brought in the mug, he went to the paper shop. And then I would say, then round we go again.
Yeah.
Wow, you're amazing. You did even more. What are you going to do next?
What's the next?
What's the next? And round you go, and round. And I went round that cycle with that boy for years. And of course, he's married now and has children of his own, and he's a nurse. Yeah, it's actually true, and he's consented. And that's how it began. Yeah. And he told me he wanted to care for other people, and he was telling the truth. The other thing I would say, so Jen and I teach this to nurses, health coaches, loads of people. You don't have to do all 4. I would say to doctors, just try and say one nice thing to a patient. You know, just say a complimentary, one thing that's cheerful in that consultation. Just compliment them on something, and I've been doing this for 15 years now. Patients come in to me with their they don't bother with the moaning. They come in with photos, with things they've done, because they know I'm really interested. The Dr. Unwin, the earlier one, they felt to get my attention, they had to say, the pain's even worse, my depression is worse, your tablets are not working. And that they thought that was the way to get my attention, and that I wouldn't be interested in success. But if you keep doing it, your practice becomes more cheerful. And it is. So final word, you don't have to do all 4. You could just practice on a couple. Yep. You don't have to do them in that order. It's just that GRIN, G-R-I-N, is easy to remember, which is why Jen did it. But I don't always do all.
We love an acronym.
Yeah, I don't always do all 4. I think noticing is very, very powerful. The doctor noticing, but also the patient noticing and coming back to feedback. I think noticing is very, very powerful. End of interruption.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's GRIN. Read the paper and have a little go. Yeah, just ask any of those questions in your next consultation and just see what happens. Okay, so we're leaving GRIN behind for now and behaviour change, and we're going to talk about food addiction, my favourite subject. Okay, so food addiction is the condition that doesn't exist, not recognised by the World Health Organization. It's not listed in the DSM manual of mental disorders in the States, and yet, look how many hits you get on Google if you look up food addiction. I thought I had done that. There. No, I haven't. And there's also thousands of research papers on it as well. And I think we're going to see if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, probably a duck. So how would we recognize food addiction? You can see that I love an acronym. So this one is CRAVED. And here's some symptoms of addiction. Okay, so the first one is C is for compulsion, and that's these powerful cravings, these powerful urges to consume that are difficult, if not impossible, to resist. Is anyone here willing to share that they've ever experienced cravings and compulsions to eat something which they've found it impossible to resist? Yeah. That's nearly everybody. R, I've called it reaching for more, but in fact what we're talking about here is tolerance. So an increased tolerance and need for the substance, in this case food, certain foods, so that you need more and more to get the same effect. So that would be, where you maybe started with one biscuit was okay, and it goes on and on, getting more and more until maybe a whole packet would be your standard approach to biscuits. Has anyone had that where they've had increasing amounts of carbohydrate and to get the same effect? Yeah. A is activities neglected. So this is sort of picks up on the idea that the world's sort of getting smaller and more focused just on getting certain foods, eating certain foods, feeling rubbish because you've eaten certain foods, thinking about the food, getting the food, wondering where the food is, and maybe neglecting certain family activities or things that you used to enjoy, sports, or maybe even work being affected. Has anybody? Usually fewer people have experienced that, but has anyone experienced that? I certainly did. Yeah, where the world becomes so focused on food. Okay, V is for volume, and this is losing control of the amount. So intending to have a couple of slices of pizza, but always then losing control of the amount and having way more than you intended. Has anybody ever experienced that? Yeah. E is for exclusion, and this really picks up the idea that if you try and stop, you get certain withdrawal symptoms, and the typical withdrawal symptoms from sugars and processed foods are things like headaches, shakiness, low mood, anxiety, sleeplessness, gastrointestinal problems. Does anybody experience withdrawal symptoms when they try and give up? A few people. And then D is for damage, and that's continued use despite awareness. So despite the fact you know it's bad for you and it's doing you harm mentally or physically, for example, if you have type 2 diabetes or obesity or a mental health condition which is worsened by eating those foods, have you continued to consume? Yes. Okay, so count yourselves up, and I definitely would have had, I was a 6 out of 6 person for sure. I had a big problem. Anything more than 3 in terms of this is in terms of the World Health Organization's definition of addiction broadly. They don't recognize food addiction, but of addiction to alcohol or drugs. Anything more than 3 would be considered a substance use problem or indicative of a substance use problem. So is anybody willing to share whether they, either in the past or now, would come out as more than 3? Yeah, quite a few people. So that's Craved, and it's a screening tool that you can obviously use on friends and family, but use in the clinic. I'll show you the Craved screening tool in a bit more detail on Saturday for those people that are coming. But we've made a screening tool out of it, and we've used it in research. But for now, how common is food addiction? As we've seen, pretty common. A lovely large meta-analysis study in 2021 using the Yale Food Addiction Scale, which is the only real main standardized research tool looking at food addiction, found a 20% overall prevalence. But a lot of those were obviously clinical groups. In binge eating disorder, it's 55% or more. And when we look at studies of patients with type 2 diabetes, it might be up to 70%. And what was that Swedish study? Yeah, so if you've got a food addiction problem, you're 6 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes, which makes complete sense if we're hearing, as David says, that, you know, if we're eating too much sugar and carbohydrate for the body to cope with, which is what you do if you have a food addiction. In the general population, oh, go on.
No, I was just going to interrupt there. Just to say, so it's interesting because in the first 25 years of medical practice, I never met a food addict. Not one, they didn't exist. Because if you're very careful not to look for them, you won't find them. So there is no problem. But once you start asking, I now find food addicts in every clinic I ever do. Every week, we're talking bread, we're talking cornflakes, all sorts of things you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to tell you a very quick story.
Oh, really quick?
It's really, really
You're
quick.
just stealing
Honestly,
my time now.
it's a good one. It's a good one. So quick. So this guy tells me that his wife is putting detergent on crusts of bread because otherwise he eats them in the bin. But he will eat it if it's got detergent anyway. So his wife has had to learn to spray bleach on the crusts of bread because that's the only thing will stop him from eating that bread.
Yeah.
Detergent doesn't stop him. That's addiction. It does exist.
That is addiction. Yes. 8 to 10% of the general population are thought to have food addiction. Important note, everyone thinks that people with food addiction are all going to be overweight. Between 10 and 20% of people with food addiction will be normal or underweight. So it's important clinically, if your clinician's listening, you're not just looking for people that are overweight. So all of that, and yet it's not a formally recognized condition. Oh, yes. So if we take the conservative estimate of 8% of the general population, I think it's probably way more than that. That turns out it's 4.3 million adults in the UK, which is a hell of a lot of people who are going to develop a hell of a lot of health problems and mental health problems. So what's going on? What's going on? Well, I think, I mean, this is just a shocker, isn't it? It's actually kind of marketed as a drug, a sugar fix. But also you've got all of these factors. In the UK, there's a big office cake culture. I don't know if that goes on here. People bringing cupcakes and everybody's birthday, you have to have a cake in the office. The general food environment, you know, petrol station, you just go and filling up your car, and you have to. I videoed one in the UK where I stopped at a motorway service station, and I videoed the gauntlet of chocolate and crisps. That they had actually sort of made this little kind of runway that you had to walk down to pay your bill. I mean, we're obsessed with it, aren't we? Every single holiday, Christmas, Easter, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, what's that spooky thing? Halloween. They're all just festivals of sugar, are they not? That's, you know, it's just an excuse to eat sugar. Okay. And also the marketing, you know, here we go, chocolate bars marketed as a cure for the withdrawal symptoms from chocolate bars. Fuzzy head is certainly one of the withdrawal symptoms from carbohydrate. And, you know, it's like hair of the dog, isn't it? Just have another one. And also this kind of greenwashing, you know, oh, it's so good. We're so caring. It hasn't got any GMOs. It's just sugar. And also look at the bright colors. You know, I was talking about being hardwired for greed. So what we are actually hardwired for is survival. And the reward system's very sensitive. Anything to do with food and sugar. That's how we survived the winter, wasn't it? We all ate the fruits and the berries in the autumn, and the brakes were off with the sugar because we had to get fat to survive. So we're hardwired for this stuff. But look at all these bright colors that are sort of, you know, to get our attention and to get the dopamine flowing, like fruit, you know, like it's kind of fruits to pick, you know, because we're not so far from our ape ancestors as we like to think. So what happens in the brain when we eat ultra-processed food? And this is how we help patients a lot as well. We explain that actually, you know, this food addiction problem it's not their fault. It's not a matter of personal weakness or personal failing. It's actually the hijacking of your brain by these sweets and ultra-processed foods. So the brain becomes hyper connected in terms of the reward system and cravings, and it all happens in the reward center and the cerebellum, which is a very sort of primitive parts of the brain that drive these automatic behaviors. Has anyone had that experience where you say, right, no more biscuits, it's Monday, no more. You get in from work, you've had a bit of a hard day, and your disembodied hand reaches into the biscuit barrel, and you're at the same time saying to yourself, I'm not, you know, I wasn't going to do this, but your hand's kind of almost out with your control. And that's because it's this automatic triggering of the dopamine, and these behaviors are driven by what's gone on in the brain. And then we're programmed to seek out ultra-processed food. The other thing that happens, you can see some links to the frontal lobes here that are going on. When the cravings start, the dopamine starts, and you're sort of triggered off, the frontal lobes are sort of dampened down. And this, again, was a survival thing where you had to be pretty brave to go out in the winter snow hunting your antelopes or going up, shimmying up a tree to get your honey. We watched a program recently, didn't we, where the hunters had gone out and they're sticking his hand in the bee's nest to get the honey. So the frontal lobes are sort of dampened down, so you don't think about you don't think about it. You don't think about the danger and how much danger you might be in. So you just go blithely off to get the honey because you're driven to do that. So that's happening to us as well. We're driven to go and get these things, and we somehow stop thinking about the negative consequences. Where in the cold light of day we can say, yes, I mustn't do that. I've got type 2 diabetes. I shouldn't buy a chocolate bar every time I go to the garage. Go to the garage. There it is, the purple Cadbury wrapper. You're triggered. You think, oh, it's been a hard day. I'll have one, and off we go again. And this brain is starting to look like an addict's brain. And actually, if you look at brains of people with alcohol abuse or cocaine abuse and food addiction, they look exactly the same. Quickly, because we really want time for questions. So the addiction cycle, eat your sugar and carbs. What you get is a big abnormal boost of dopamine, particularly, but also serotonin. So dopamine, the motivation, reward neurotransmitter, serotonin, the happy, relaxed neurotransmitter. Obviously, you get a brief period where you feel kind of good and you feel relaxed. The brain doesn't really like these really high levels of dopamine and serotonin. Everything's trying to balance out, isn't it, in biology? So the brain thinks, oh, there's a lot of dopamine going on here. We'll knock out a few dopamine receptors. We'll knock out a few serotonin receptors, so there's less dopamine and serotonin available. I hope you can see that that's a really bad idea, because if you have fewer dopamine receptors, you've less sensitivity to dopamine, you're going to feel unmotivated. And less serotonin receptors, you're going to feel less happy. And we do know that high ultra-processed food and sugar diets are strongly linked with anxiety and depression and poor mental health. And that's probably why you've knocked out all these receptors. Low mood. And then, of course, we have increased cravings and compulsions to eat. And this is the tolerance idea, and it's the same with alcohol, that you just need more and more and more to trigger that same effect. And it becomes this tunnel of doom. Common drug foods, I mean, we don't need to go through them. You all know what they are, because you were probably raising your hands. David has pointed out that, it's often things like bread. Actually, it isn't always sweet things, but in clinic, it's often things like bread that people get addicted to. And they've done studies on this and asked people what are the most common foods that they get addicted to. Nicole Avena work, if you want to look that up. So, what's the answer? I won't go on about this, because you're going to hear more about this on Saturday as well, but I would say the answer is real whole foods as nature intended. So all these lovely real whole foods, and it's a restricted carbohydrate approach, because many whole foods are carbohydrate, low in carbohydrates anyway. In the book, it gives you a green list for people with food addiction, like all the things you should eat and enjoy. A red list that people should avoid. Definitely avoid sugars, anything with sugars, weird oils, alcohol, sorry to say, grains and starches, the really sugary fruits, ketchup and condiments and things like that. But there are things where people can sort of venture with caution. All of these. It's another acronym. This time it's DOSE. And the idea here is that if you're asking somebody to give up the things that they really, really love, and let me tell you that food addicts really, really love food, and they have a kind of romance with it, and it's the thing that makes life worth living, they need to start to think how they're going to get these feel-good hormones, neurotransmitters, in other ways in their life that we talked about, didn't we, that life becomes restricted and becomes focused on the food. So real recovery from food addiction is about what you're going to replace the food with, what you're going to love instead of food. So we talk about, obviously hobbies, relationships, etc., etc. And community support. David's already mentioned that it's massively important for people with food addiction. It's a lifelong condition. You're never going to reverse it. You're only going to be in remission and manage it. And also, you have to be super aware that it can transfer to other things. So we've seen this with people who have bariatric surgery. They sometimes transfer. There's actually a proportion of people who develop a problem with alcohol because they can no longer do the food thing, so they would maybe do the alcohol thing, but it can transfer to other behaviors. Community makes a massive difference for people. So just quickly, I did do some research on how to treat people with food addiction, and this is the first ever published paper on food addiction treatment internationally. And so there was 3 groups of us. There was a UK group, North America group, Sweden group. We've actually, this was the first paper that we published in 2022. This year we're going to have the 1-year data, and we're going to talk about that at the conference in May. So we've got more data than that now. This is just the pre and post, and it was an online intervention for 10 to 14 weeks. And we talked to people about addiction, what goes on in the brain. We screened them. We got them to work out their own food plans based on the knowledge that we'd given them. And then we talked about relapse prevention and what to do if you have a slip-up, which everybody will do at some point. And it was great because we got significant reduction in food addiction symptoms, significant improvement in mental well-being, and a significant reduction in body weight. And this is just to quickly show you the craved score. If you remember, craved is out of 6. So this is like, where did people start on the craved score? The lowest was 3, and we had a few that were 6. I hope you can see that lots of people improving. You can't see here very well the people that got worse, which is good because it's in yellow. But let me tell you, there were more people who did well. This is the UK, North America, and the Swedish data. And overall, people doing much better in terms of symptoms. And then this is super hot off the press. You're the first people to see this. So this is the 1-year data for the American group, and this is the Yale Food Addiction Score before the program, after the program, and that was already significant. And this is the 6 months and 12 months data, which we're absolutely thrilled about, because most interventions you get a sort of waning off of the effect, but it's showing that the majority of people taking part are really significantly improving. And these people would be considered to be in remission because they've not got any symptoms at all there. So we're really, really thrilled with that. The little book, you can get it on Amazon here. We checked in the hotel before we came out. You can actually order it in New Zealand. I've just got a few to sell or give away if you want one tonight. And then finally, it's a long way to come, but if any of you would like to come, I'm organising a conference on the 17th of May in London. And what we've done is because the WHO says food addiction doesn't exist, we did apply to have it recognised, and they said, well, there's no consensus in the expert community. So we thought, we've got all the experts we could find internationally who either work with or research in food addiction, and we're pulling together a series of consensus statements on food addiction. We're going to launch them at this conference. And if you scan that, you can actually as well buy an online ticket. We are doing live streaming. Obviously, you wouldn't want to live stream it, you guys, because it would be in the middle of the night, but you would get the recording as soon as it came out if you buy the live stream ticket. So it would be great if you could join us and help us to get the recognition of food addiction over the line, because I think that will mean there's more research, there's more treatment available, and there's more help for people who have a very serious condition that will lead to serious physical and mental health problems if help isn't available. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David and Jen. I think all of you will agree what a treat it's been having these two absolute stars and champions for the work we're trying to do here, but they're achieving overseas as well. So thank you again. Can we give them another round of applause? We're going to have some short time for Q&A because we're desperately trying to get this community together in person, and to actually have that is so wonderful. But before I do that, I'll take the opportunity to thank two people. Karen Zinn and Jackie Pratt have done a tremendous amount of work to get this together. So thank you so much, and we've got another 2 days of events, which I know are going to go off without a hitch because of your wonderful work while we watch vicariously from the sideline. Okay, so now Jackie is going to run with the microphone. So it's time to have some comments and questions. There goes one straight away down the front there too. Glenn Davies, and I'll hand that back.
So in reference to Grin, I think about 3 years ago, I said to Grant Schofield that my goal is to become New Zealand's David Unwin. I have some excellent resources, but I'm noticing that all I've actually achieved is the same haircut. But there is some relevance to that, because you said that in your practice, 50% of your clients had achieved drug-free remission, but in your practice, it's 20%. Why, with such incredible success, have not every doctor in your practice adopted enthusiastically the same approach? And it's relevant because that's kind of what we're talking about here.
There's several reasons for that. Year on year, actually, it's going up at the practice. So initially, it was just me and 8 doctors who disagreed. And then there was 2 and 3 and 4. And then your nurses change over and you have to start all over again with the nurses who don't believe you, and then they do, and then one of them goes. We are still increasing, so that I think we're up to 54% now. It's going up all the time. One of the main problems is food addiction. When you go into ones that the approach is not suitable for, or difficult, food addiction is a problem. For the younger doctors, we're a triple training practice. So there's a lot of training going on, and the younger doctors are struggling with ordinary medicine, never mind adding in this approach. Some of them can do it, and some can't. So those are the various factors. Some of them patient, and some of them doctors. And then it's not an approach that everybody wants to do. Some people try it, and they, either because of addiction or because they, I don't know. Well, I don't know yet why they don't. Food addiction is definitely, increasingly, I realize, a big problem. I used to call it carb creep, and that trivializes it. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for your wonderful talks. Really enjoyed them. Jen, I just love the idea of changing the world by yourself with others. You know, going against the World Health Organization and just making
Have a go.
waves. Yeah, it's what we do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And David, I was interested, you know, you said at the start of your practice adopting the low-carb approach. Was that an approach that the whole practice took on as low-carb, or was it sort of you invited patients to do it as you encountered them? In my experience, I ask patients to see if they're interested or not. But if you have a whole practice approach, that may be a better way of approaching things. I don't know.
Well, at the beginning, the problem, it was just me, so that was the problem. And we had the standard diet sheet. So if you're interested, I was talking to patients. This thing, see, low carb 12 years ago wasn't really talked about. So you didn't say low carb. You just said, I've got this way that I could really help you. I didn't have a label for it. So we just said, I've got this way. Come to a meeting if you're interested, if you want to improve your diabetes. So since then, now we give it a name, and it's formed into a far more defined thing.
Yeah, a great presentation, and well done on your BMJ paper, David. And Jen. That's pretty amazing. My question's for Jen, actually. I'm interested in the maintenance phase, because as you said, this is where people, they lose traction. So how does GRIN morph into maintenance, or is it just when people start to fall by the way, you go back through your cycle?
Yeah, I'll let David answer because he does it in practice.
So GRIN's really useful. When people fall by the wayside, I'm revisiting their goals, because maybe we got those wrong, or it's helpful to remind them. So I'm trying to find out, what are we trying to do? What was your goal? So I find GRIN really useful there when I'm restarting. And then under resources, I'm visiting again what really worked when we did this a couple of years ago. Somebody like Roy. you know, how he says, yes, I knew how to do it. And I said, well, you could do it again. And there we go around grin again. So it's very useful in maintenance because you're reflecting on the goals, you're reflecting on useful resources, you're suggesting new increments or ways, for instance, to deal with Christmas. That's my commonest problem is Christmas. Every year through January, I'm struggling. So I go back through resources, increments, and then how did you feel when you were low carb?
Yeah, no.
And they go, I felt brilliant. So you go, oh, you felt brilliant. Well, you could feel brilliant again, and off we go. And so it's really useful in maintenance. It's one of my key things.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an excellent,
Yeah.
that's an excellent point because the nurses in the practice would say, I just don't know what to say when they gain a lot of weight after Christmas. You know, it's a problem for clinicians. And what Jen has taught me is that you reframe failure. So you say, okay, so Christmas hasn't gone brilliantly this year. Don't beat yourself up about it. How are you going to do Christmas next year? What could you do differently next year specifically? At what point did it go wrong? So this idea, I don't have any failures in the practice at all. I just have learning opportunities. And as an old guy, I've learned stuff by making mistakes. So I don't judge other people. So thank you. That's a good point. Reframing failure.
Keep you fit.
Kia ora, thank you so much for coming. I've been on this low carb journey. Me and Lily found him somehow a long time ago, and it's been really like you're banging your head against the wall. Our Indigenous populations, you know, our propensity to diabetes is just so easy, and addiction on all fronts is massive for us. You know, we got our babies being born carbohydrate addicts, and it's not being acknowledged. And so your mahi and your determination to push this on a world scale and say, hey, you know, fix this. I'm really glad to see Bruce here because Bruce is awesome and he does a lot of our GP teaching, and he is very passionate about motivation. The current motivational consultations that our med students are still being taught are just like painful and irritating. And so, you know, bringing that, Buddhism teaches that gratitude is an important way to bring hope into people's lives and shift them out of bad situations. So all of your mahi, your work is really important for helping us to actually get the ball, that snowball growing, and for legitimising this that's been around for a long time. So I was just asking, after all my statements, have you got any speakers talking about pregnancy in your food addiction conference?
Wow, no, we haven't. I think because there's been so little work done on it, but it is hugely important. There is someone I can put you in touch with who's written a fantastic paper on the sort of generational effects of addiction, and as you say, mothers getting pregnant when they're, you know, incredibly addicted to carbohydrate, and how that affects the brains of the children, and then they're more likely to be. And we know this about cross addiction. You know, it's all the same part of the brain, whether it's alcohol, drugs, nicotine, caffeine, or sugar. And so people are more likely to have cross addiction if they have one addiction. There is also a bit of a genetic component as well, that certainly a lot of, you know, say, when I've interviewed a lot of women who have food addiction, there's sometimes a father who's had an alcohol problem, that kind of thing. So sometimes it can be a different addiction in the next generation. But we just need so much more research and so much more clinical provision, and that won't come until it's a recognised condition.
Also, we still have what happens.
Moving on.
Questions to David, comments to Jen. I noticed in all of the questions that you had up there, there were no why questions. You never used the word why.
Yeah.
And yet, as
don't need to know
medical
why.
practitioners, we are trained to ask why all the time. David, how did you change to not using why in your questions with your patients?
It was a
It was a struggle, wasn't it?
it was a struggle, yes, but I'll tell you. So I had a sort of crisis as a doctor where I was trying to cure everybody and it was failing and I felt really bad and I thought I'm going to leave medicine. And I thought I need to find somebody to help me. And I thought, who has a harder job than me? And I thought social workers probably. So I found an old social worker and I was asking, how have you survived? And he said to me, he was asking what I did. And he said, what you're doing is you're taking on the burden of your patient completely and alone. And you need to share that. You need to start using it more as a collaboration. And that was a light bulb moment for me when I saw that by my questioning, I was taking the problem as now my problem, and I wasn't doing it with the patient. And I knew that was, so at least I knew it was a problem, so that when Jen came along, I recognized the solution that I was looking for, and I had the energy to try it. The other problem was I thought that sort of open-ended questions in consultations, I thought, how am I ever going to run at 10 minutes? But actually, it works out as more efficient because I actually find out what's going on and what the hopes are. So that's quite a long answer, but for me, it's been a very long journey, a very long journey. Thank you, that's a really good question.
And I think another way to look at it is, if someone wants to get from here to here, you don't really need to understand how they got here. It's like if someone says to you, how do I get to Auckland Zoo from here? You're not going to say, well, where did you come from? Where did you start out this morning? So you're just trying to get them from there to there. So we don't really need to, the solution-focused philosophy is that you don't need to understand more about the problem. You need to understand more about the solution.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming and being part of this, coming on Saturday as well. Thanks again, Jen and Dave, for coming so far and for all the work you've done. And we'll be happy to have you come down in front of you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'll take that off.